So this is the lab part of Integument, and if you were in actual face-to-face lab, you would see this model. And so let's talk about this model just a little bit, and we'll come back and talk about the rest of it in a second. But when you look at it, what this is a slice of skin. And so you can see it here. So this is the most superficial part. This is the deepest part. But it's not just this, because if you look at it right here, it says A. And if you look at it right here, it says B. And if you look at it right here, it says C. And then there's a line right here and a line right here. And the reason it's divided up that way is because we really have three types of skin. So we already know that we have thick skin. And here's thick skin over here. Remember, it has no hairs at all. And this is found, remember, on the palms of your hands, the soles of your feet, your fingertips, places like that, but no hairs. And then we have thin skin, which is over here. And so thin skin is also called hairy skin. And you can see the hair sticking up. But there's really two kinds of hairy skin. And what makes the two types different is this gland right here. So if you see this gland versus this gland, those are those two types of sweat glands that we talked about. And so this is that one that's the apocrine sweat gland, and so it produces this smelly or odorous sweat, where this is not smelly over here. And so remember, these are confined to certain areas of the body. So this would be like the armpit, where this other part would be just more like on the outside of your arm or your chest or the back or someplace. So really there's three types of the skin, and we're going to see that in just a little bit, but that's what the model looks like. Well, don't forget that this integument is not just skin. It is skin, but it's also all these other organs. Look, there are glands in here, there are blood vessels in here, there are hairs, there's muscles, there's all sorts of things. And so it's not just an organ. Remember, integument is an organ system. And we'll be able to see this in all of these things. And then if you look at this model, like I said, here's the superficial part and here's the deep part here. And we already know that you can divide the integument up into three layers. Remember, the middle layer, the dermis. So here's the dermis right here. This is the middle layer right here. It goes from this wiggly line down here all the way down to about the bottom of the lowest hair. So it really is more like this. That's the dermis. And then remember, we have the epidermis. Epi means on top of. And so if you look at it, it's here. So it's this wavy line right here. And then everything above it. So that's the epidermis. And then we also have the hypodermis. So hypo means below or beneath. And so this is going to be the deepest layer. And if you look at it, it starts at about the bottom of the lowest hair and then goes down. And so that is the hypodermis. So when you look at this, there's three layers here. And here they are right here. And so you should be able to pick those out. So again, you need to find this wavy line, because that's going to be the difference between the epidermis and the dermis. And you need to find the bottom of the lowest hair, because that's basically going to be the margin between the dermis and the hypodermis. Here's a picture that's in your lab book. This is exercise 5 in the lab book, by the way. And that's what we're using. And so again, there's the epidermis, there's the dermis, there's the hypodermis. And we're going to see that there are different tissues and so on. Any questions about any of this so far? So again, A is thin skin, and it's not smelly. So this is skin on your arms, your back, the abdomen, places like that. And then here's B, and B is thin skin, that is smelly, has odorous sweat. And so this is the armpits and the groin, around the anus, places like that. And then here's C, and C is thick skin, which is, remember, again, on your palms and your soles and so on. And then when you look in here, we can see a bunch of things, and we're going to go over these things. But let's look at the epidermis first. So if you peel off the epidermis, this is what it looks like. So there's that wavy line I was talking about. So it's everything above the wavy line. And there you can see the wavy line right here. So if we come over here, here's the wavy line right here. And so it's everything above that. We come over here, here's the wavy line. And so everything above that. And then don't forget, we have thin skin and we have thick skin. So thin skin, remember, is hairy, and thick skin doesn't have any hair. But there's another difference, because if we look in this epidermis, thin skin has 4 strata. We named those, we looked at them. And thick skin has 5 strata, and we named those. We looked at them in lecture. So when we look at it here, there's our wavy line right there. That's the basement membrane. This is the epidermis. And again, this is hairy. Look, there's a hair. So it's going to have 4 strata. Well, on the model, you can see both of them. And right here is the dividing line between those. So if we look here, we can see 4 strata. There's 1, 2, 3, and 4. But if we look over here, there's 5. There's 1, 2, 3, and then this is that extra one right here, 4, and then 5. So right now, even without naming them or knowing anything about them, just because they look different, you can pick out the strata. But we already have named these. So remember, if you start at the bottom and then work your way toward the top, it's the stratum basal, and then the stratum spinosum, stratum granulosum, and then lucidum. And remember, this is the one that you'd find in thick, but you don't find in thin. And then corneum. So if we go back and look at it, go the other way, we go back and look at it, that is the basal, and that is the spinosum, and there's the granulosum, and then we don't have a lucidum, and then we have corneum, and then over here, there's basal, there's spinosum, there's granulosum, and here's that one that we do have over here, that's lucidum, and then corneum. So if you look here, these numbers match these numbers. And so hopefully you'll be able to look at this and name these numbers, or name these layers. And so here's an actual slide. And so again, we should be able to pick out the layers. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is thin skin. So basal, spinosum, granulosum, corneum. But if we go to thick skin, there's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers. And so we're going to have basal, spinosum, granulosum, lucidum, and then corneum. So this is thin. And everybody see if you can pick out the layers. So I'm going to draw a little line right here, because that's one layer. And then there, I'm going to draw a line right there, because that's the second layer. And then I'm going to draw a line right here, because that's the third. And then here's the fourth. Same thing if we go to thick. Here's the thick. So if we draw a little line right here, that's 1. And there's 2. And then here's 3. And then here is 4. And then there's 5. So thick skin. And if we come back to this, everybody see if you can name these layers. Again, if you start at the bottom, 5 is basal. And that's true here and here. 4, spinosum. 3, granulosum. And then over here we don't have this one, that's lucidum. And then finally, corneum. Any questions about any of that? Should be able to do the same thing here. Here's thin, and here's thick. And we should be able to go through and pick out all the individual layers from here to here, and from here to here. So where are the hairs on the thin model? There are the hairs. Now, this is a microscope slide, so the hair might be here, it's off the slide, or it could be over here. We don't see it, but this is hairy skin. It's just not visible in this picture on the pink model. Well, I don't know which one you're talking about, but again, there's the hairs. No hairs over here. Okay, anybody have any questions about the layers of the epidermis? And again, here they are from the most deep to the most superficial. Okay. We also, remember, talked about the dermis. And the dermis has 2 layers. So there's a superficial layer, that's the papillary, and there's a deeper layer, that's the reticular. So if we look at it, here's the superficial layer right here, and it goes like this. It's about 20% of the total. So about 1/5 of the total from here to here. And then we have the reticular layer, and it goes from here down to about here. And so when you look at it, it's about 80%, or about 4/5 of the total. And even in this picture, you can see that they're different. Look, this one has few fibers, a lot fewer than down in the bottom. Now there's actually all 3 types of fibers there, but they're spread out. And so they're not packed together because this is loose. Remember, we have 2 different categories. We have loose, but if you look down here, you see lots and lots of fibers because they're densely packed. Now there's only 2 types of fibers here, but this is dense down here. So they're very different from each other. So let's look at the 2 layers. So the top layer is called papillary, and the reason why is because the tops are ruffled like this. And somebody thought these things looked like nipples. And so the word for nipple is papilla. So where we have these papillae, we have this papillary layer. The tissue here is a areolar connective tissue. And so hopefully you remember areolar. It looks like this. So there's collagen, there's elastin, and there's reticular fibers. We have all 3 types of fibers, but it's spread out, it's loose, it's soft. And so this is what gives your skin its softness. And so the thicker this layer is, the softer your skin is. So the ones with the thickest layer are babies, and then children, and then females, and then finally males. So it's this layer right here. Well, look, this layer is where those ruffle-like things are. And if you look over here, you can see them naked. They've taken the top part off. Those are those dermal papillae. So you can see all of these papillae. Well, if you blow up a papilla, they look like this. So there's a papilla right there. And here they are naked over here. These are those dermal papillae because they took this part off so you could see it. Well, if you look inside these dermal papillae, what you find are a lot of blood vessels. These are blood vessels. You find nerve endings, and then you also find these little organs, which are called Meissner's corpuscles. So Meissner's corpuscles, remember, detect light touch. So if something touches your skin, it gets transmitted down here, and that sends a signal to your brain so that you know what it is that's been touched. Well, if we go back to this other picture, we have them all over our body, but they're in high concentrations in places like our fingertips. And so in our fingertips, which are very sensitive, we have tons of these things. So these are Meissner's corpuscles. We also have Merkel cells. Remember, Merkel cells are up in the epithelium though, so they're right here. And Merkel cells detect even lighter touch. They're on this base right here. They have a little nerve that comes down from them, but they detect light touch. So even lighter, even softer than this, which is light touch. So Zoe says Merkel cells are light. That's exactly right, Zoe. So there's our areolar or connective tissue. So this is, again, what gives your skin its softness. Okay, let's look at the deeper layer. So the deeper layer is this reticular layer. And the reticular layer is not areolar or connective tissue. It's dense, irregular. So remember, dense, irregular has collagen and some elastin, but the fibers are running every which way. And a good way to think about this is think of it like canvas or upholstery cloth or something. And just like you can wrap upholstery cloth around a couch, this is wrapped around our body. And what it does is it provides strength to the skin. So this is the strong part of the skin. In fact, if you're wearing leather, anywhere on your body, your shoes, your belt, whatever it is, leather is just the reticular layer of the skin of some animal. And you think about how strong leather is, it's because of all of these fibers, mostly collagen, but also some elastin. And so this reticular layer is strong, but it's also a little bit stretchy. And then if you let go of it, it goes back to where it was. So when we look at it, it's this layer here. And you can see even in this picture, all of these fibers in here. If you look at it on the model, remember it's about 4/5. So here's 1/5, and here's 4/5. It's about 80%. And even on this model, you can see little streaks in here. And those streaks represent those fibers. And it's these fibers. So it's dense, irregular. So remember, dense irregular, those thick collagen fibers. There's also some elastin, but look how they run. They run every which way. They're running in lots of different directions, and because they run in all these different directions, it resists tension in all directions. So no matter how you pull on the skin, it's going to resist that tension. Now, skin is not as strong as a tendon because dense irregular is not as strong as dense regular. So it's easier to tear skin than it is to tear a ligament or a tendon, but it's still strong. Any questions about any of that? And then another thing we have in this reticular layer is we have these things. These are called Pacinian corpuscles. So Pacinian corpuscles, some books call them lamellated. Pacinian corpuscles detect pressure. In other words, they're a lot deeper. They're way down here. Remember, they look like an onion that's been cut in half like this. It's got lots and lots of layers like an onion has. So you have to press a lot harder to activate them because they're much deeper. And so you can see here that's much deeper than these are. So touch and pressure. If you look on the model, there's our Pacinian corpuscle. Any questions about the dermis? Okay, and then we have the hypodermis. Remember, hypo means below or beneath. And so this is going to be the deepest layer. Remember, this is not part of the skin. It's not skin, but it's what holds the skin on. So it's deep to the skin. And when you look at the hypodermis, it's mostly going to be adipose tissue. There's some areolar in there, but it's mostly adipose. So when we look at it here, it's this down here. So this is our adipose, and here's some areolar right here. It's a little bit of areolar also. So when we look here, this is the adipose. And right here, that's the areolar. Well, if you remember, adipose looks like this. It looks like bubble wrap, but it's not full of air. Each of these bubbles is full of fat, liquid fat. And so all of these are bubbles full of liquid fat. And so fat, remember, is for energy storage, but it's also for insulation. So it keeps the heat in, it keeps the cold out, it's for insulation. And then it's also very, very, very cushiony. And so it's shock absorbing too, and so it protects the tissues beneath it. Remember, when you look at one of these cells, the nucleus gets pushed way over and there's only a little bit of cytoplasm. All the rest of it is that liquid fat. So that's the hypodermis. Any questions about it? Okay, well, we also looked at glands today. We looked at two types of glands. Remember, we looked at oil glands. But oil glands don't really secrete oil, they secrete sebum. And they're not really called oil glands, they're called sebaceous glands. So remember, sebaceous glands are shaped like this. They're alveolar. And remember what happens is the cells divide, and then the cells get bigger and bigger and bigger until they explode. And so they're holocrine. And so what comes out is this oily secretion called sebum. If you look at them under a microscope, they look like this. So here's that holocrine acinar gland. So it's shaped like a flask, it's acinar, and then here are the little cells that are dividing, and then bigger cells and bigger cells until they rupture. When we look at them on the model, almost all of these are associated with a hair. So here's the hair right here. And so the glands are these little flask-shaped glands all around the hair. Again, if you look on the inside, there's where the hair is, right there. Now the hair's been removed, but that's where it was. And then here you can see several of these glands all around it. So here's the hair in this picture, and there's the gland. And it's actually easy to see the shape, and it's easy to see these small cells down here that are dividing. And then look, they get a little bit bigger, and they get a little bit bigger, and they get a little bit bigger until they finally pop. We only have one kind of sebaceous gland, but we have more than one kind of sweat gland. We talked about these two types of sweat glands, apocrine and merocrine. Well, they're technically called sudoriferous glands. So we have apocrine sudoriferous glands and merocrine sudoriferous glands. And remember the difference between them. They're both this long tube, so they're tubular, but the bottom of the tube is coiled up. And so we either have a tight coil, and they're small, or we have a much bigger coil, and they're connected to a hair. So we have two types. So these little ones that on the model are white, and this one's not cut, so you can see what it looks like on the outside. This one's cut, so you see what it looks like on the inside. Those are merocrine. And then we have the yellow big one, a lot looser, and that's an apocrine. So if you look at them under a microscope, here's our tight ball. And that little tight ball, again, is merocrine. And then here's our big loose ball, and that's apocrine. But remember, the real difference is the way they release their product. Merocrine is by exocytosis. And so there are no cell parts in it. And so there's nothing for bacteria to eat. And so the sweat has no odor. But apocrine, remember, top is going to pinch off. And when the top pinches off, we're going to have cell parts in the sweat, which is food for bacteria. And so we're going to wind up with body odor associated with these. So you can see how different they look under a microscope. Here's our tight ball, little bitty circle in the middle, a little hollow space. And here, big wide ball, loose, and a big hollow space in the middle. And then you can't see it very well, but remember all these are the same size cells, where these have tall cells and short cells, tall cells and short cells, and so on. Any questions about those? Okay, we also today looked at hair follicles. And so remember they're layers. And the easiest way to learn these is just to learn them in order. And so we did that already, and we're going to do it again, but probably won't spend as much time. But remember, it also is bigger down here at the bottom. So we have the bulb at the bottom. There's the bulb. Remember, there's a little nerve that's connected to it so that you can detect it if something hits the hair. There's a muscle that can contract and make the hair stand up straight. All those things we already talked about. Well, you can see them all here. So if you look here, this hair is missing, but this is that sheath right there. And here's where that nerve would be attached. I don't know why they didn't put it on there. But there's the muscle, the erector pili muscle. Here are those sebaceous glands, what we just finished talking about. And then if you cut it open, here's what the hair looks like. And so you can see the layers here. And so you can see one layer followed by the next layer, followed by the next layer. And on this model, they actually put letters for all of the layers. Well, you can see the same thing here. So here's the bulb, there's our papilla, and here are the layers right here. Same thing here. So if we look at this, remember our layers, there's a connective tissue sheath, and that's what this orange layer is. That's the connective tissue sheath. And then we have this little white line right here, and that's the glassy membrane. And then we've got two layers of purple, there and there. And that's the external epithelial root sheath and the internal epithelial root sheath. And then the hair, there's a little pink line right here. That's the cuticle, and then the black is the cortex, and then the white line in the middle is the medulla. So cuticle, cortex, and medulla. And there's the cuticle, cortex, and medulla. So Zoe says, explain the process of ingrown hairs. Sure. So if you cut this hair, so you shave, we cut it off here. Well, normally it just grows back like that. But if you somehow make the cut below the surface, like you stretch the skin a little bit and you cut it below the surface, well, sometimes these skin cells from here and here will close up this little space right here. And so when the hair begins to grow, it starts to grow this way. It bends and grows underneath the surface, and the hair can keep growing and growing. Now, sometimes over here it can come out, but you still wind up with this damaged tissue right here from the hair growth. And with damaged tissue, you get inflammation. And so that area is going to turn red, and it's going to swell, and it's going to hurt. The only way to fix this is to get that hair back over here where it's supposed to be. So you basically have to cut through this skin that grew and then pull this hair back out until there. Now you can cut it off if you want, but that's what an ingrown hair is. It's a hair that doesn't make it to the surface. Does that help or answer your question, Zoe? Okay, so here are layers. So again, there's connective tissue sheath, and then we have the glassy membrane, external epithelial root sheath, internal epithelial root sheath, and then cuticle, cortex, and medulla. So again, for lecture and also for lab, you should be able to label those layers. And you can see them all over here. And then also, remember, here's the bulb, and there's our papilla, and then here are those melanocytes we were talking about that's going to give color to the hair. Now here's a diagram, but here's an actual picture. And so look, the diagram looks very much like the picture. So you see that? It looks like that, and that looks like that, and so on. And here's this, and so on. So even in the picture, you should be able to figure out what these different parts are. So these purple lines that you see here, that's the connective tissue sheath. Right, there's the basement membrane, there's the external epithelial, internal, and so on. Any questions about hair? So here is a labeled slide, and just like in lecture, I would like you to be able to label these. So you should be able to figure out what that is, and then what that is, and what this is, and this, and so on. And so if you do that, I have that same thing I showed you before, so you can practice with it. Another thing about the hair is you can see different parts to the hair. So the part of the hair that sticks up above the surface is called the shaft. The part of the hair down below under the skin is called the root. And then if you go down to the bottom, remember we have this enlarged area, that's the bulb. And then here's this little nipple-like structure, that's the papilla. So same thing here. So there's the shaft, there's the root, there's the bulb, there's the papilla, and then you can see the layers here all the way through. Okay, well, we talked about skin cancer in lecture, and so I don't really want to spend much time talking about it, but I do want to remind you of it. And the reason why is because the age that most of the people who take this class, that's when you need to be worried about skin cancer. Because remember, what causes it mostly is UV light. And UV light, that damage is cumulative. And so it's the young people that need to worry about it because they're the ones that spend most of the time in the sun. They're the ones that use tanning beds and stuff like that. And so by the time you get to a certain age, the damage has already been done, and there's no real way to reverse that damage. And so when you get to like 40 to 50 and so on, this is when this damage is going to show up and when you're going to start seeing these skin cancers. Well, remember, there's three types of these that we talked about them. There's basal cells, there's squamous cells, and there's melanomas. And so I don't want to spend much time with it because we looked at it in the other one. But remember, basal cells are the least dangerous, and melanomas are the most dangerous. And you need to be able to tell them apart. You need to know where they come from, whether or not they metastasize, and how you go about treating them. And so here's the basal. That's where it comes from, the stratum basal, and so they're called basal cell carcinomas. Well, if they're not in the PowerPoint that you have, they're in the lecture PowerPoint. You have access to them, and I'll change it if you want me to and put them back in the lab one. They are in the lecture one for sure. But anyway, squamous cells, remember, squamous cells are rough feeling and they tend to bleed. And remember, they're usually on edges. And these, not only can you have to remove them, but most of the time you have to have radiation of the surrounding tissue. And that's to keep them from spreading or metastasizing. And then if you look at melanomas, we talked about those, very metastatic, very hard to treat, very dangerous. And we looked at them. Remember, they usually have color to them. Here they are metastasizing. And I gave you this A, B, C, D, E rule to remember. And hopefully you will. Here's benign, so that's not cancerous. And here's malignant. They are, and so you can see the differences between them. Any questions? So that's the lab for the integument. And we're done with the integument now at this point. So around 4 p.m. today, there should be a quiz that pops up about the integument. So that'll be, I guess, the 4th quiz, I think, lab quiz. Anybody have any questions?